Taurus. I want to say something honestly before I turn a single card, because I felt it happen in my own chest the moment this reading started coming through, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I got sick to my stomach too. Not because something terrible is about to happen to you. This isn't that kind of reading. It's because of what I saw underneath the surface in the part of your life you've been carrying quietly for longer than anyone around you has realized. And I want to name the specific injustice in it clearly, right at the start. Because you've been living inside it for so long, you've stopped fully seeing it yourself. You endured something, and you did it while still showing up, still functioning, still being useful, still being kind, still being the person other people leaned on, even while something painful was actively happening underneath all of it. That combination, real pain, carried silently, while still performing wellness for everyone around you, is one of the cruelest things a person can be asked to do. And almost nobody ever gets credit for managing it, because managing it well is precisely what makes it invisible. I want to be careful here because I don't know the specific shape of what you've carried, and I'm not going to invent details that aren't mine to know. What I do know, from what these cards are showing me clearly, is the pattern underneath it. And I want to walk you through that pattern piece by piece, because you deserve to finally see it named plainly by someone other than yourself. I want to say one more thing before we begin, because it matters for how you receive everything that follows. This reading isn't going to tell you what happened to you. I can't do that, and I wouldn't pretend to. What I can do is show you the shape of what carrying something like that alone for a long time actually does to a person, the specific costs it extracts, the specific kind of strength it demands, and the specific injustice of doing all of that without anyone properly noticing. If what I describe matches your own experience even partially, that's not a coincidence. It's simply what this particular pattern looks like, regardless of the specific details underneath it. Let me show you. Let me turn the first card. There, immediately. That's the weight itself. And I want to be honest about what I'm looking at. This is a figure lying face down, 10 swords driven into the back. The sky above completely black except for a thin band of gold light along the horizon. I want to reassure you about something before I describe the rest of this, because the image is heavy and I don't want you sitting in unnecessary alarm. This card is never a warning about what's still coming. It's a report on what already happened. This is confirming that the worst of what you've carried is already behind you, not still ahead. You survived it. You're on the other side of it now, even if it doesn't fully feel that way yet. I want to describe what this card is actually naming, because it matters that you hear it clearly. 10 swords is not one difficulty. It's an accumulation, many separate things, landing over time, each one difficult on its own, all of them together forming something that would have broken most people considerably sooner than it broke you, if it broke you at all. You didn't fully collapse under it. You kept moving somehow through all 10 of them, which is itself an extraordinary thing that's never once been properly acknowledged. I want to point out the thin band of gold light along the horizon in this image, because it's the only detail in the entire card that isn't dark, and I don't want you to miss it after everything else I've just described. That light isn't decoration. It's the honest confirmation that the darkest part is finished. You're not looking at this card from before the ending. You're looking at it from after, standing on the other side of something that would have genuinely broken a great many people, still upright, still here, still capable of listening to a reading like this one and feeling something in response rather than nothing at all. I want to be honest about something else this card is telling me, because it matters. The swords in this image are already fully embedded, not still descending. Nothing further is coming from that same direction. Whatever accumulated, whatever landed on you over however long this actually took, it has finished landing. You're not braced against more of the same thing still arriving. You're simply carrying the aftermath of something that's already completely happened. I want to say one more thing about this card before we move on, because it matters for understanding the timing of everything that follows. Cards like this one only ever describe an ending, never a beginning. That's important because it means this reading isn't warning you that something like this could happen again in the same shape. It's confirming that this specific chapter, whatever it contained, has closed. What comes next in this reading is genuinely about what happens after, not a continuation of the same difficulty in a new disguise. Let me turn the next card, because I want to know exactly what this looked like on the nights nobody else could see. There it is. And I want to sit with this one carefully, because it's the heart of the injustice this reading opened with. This is a figure sitting upright in bed, hands pressed over the face, 9 swords hanging on the wall above the room, completely dark. This is where the real weight actually lived. Not in public, not in front of anyone who might have offered comfort, but alone, at night, in the specific hours when there was nobody left to perform for, and the exhaustion of the day finally had room to catch up with you. I want to name this clearly, because it's the part that's been the most unfair. During the day, you found a way to function. You went through motions, met obligations, made other people laugh, took care of things that needed taking care of. And then the door closed, and the performance ended, and you were left completely alone with the actual size of what you were carrying. I want to describe why that specific isolation compounds the pain rather than simply doubling it. Difficulty faced together, witnessed by even one other person, is genuinely easier to survive than the exact same difficulty faced in total privacy. Not because the difficulty itself changes, but because being seen while you struggle tells you the struggle is real, that it matters, that you're not making too much of it. Facing it entirely alone strips that confirmation away. You are left to be both the person suffering and the only witness to that suffering, which meant you also had to be the only one deciding, night after night, whether what you were going through actually counted as hard enough to matter. It did. I want to say that plainly, because nobody has said it to you directly in a long time. It counted, all of it. I want to describe one more detail in this image before we move on, because it matters. Look at where the swords are hanging on the wall, above the figure, not embedded in the body itself. That placement tells me something important about the nature of what you were carrying during those private hours. It was displayed constantly in your mind, present, looming, impossible to fully escape even in the quiet of your own room. But it wasn't actively cutting into you in that exact moment, the way it might have felt. Much of what kept you up at night was the weight of anticipation and replay, rather than something new happening in real time. That distinction doesn't make it less exhausting. It simply tells me something about the specific shape of the exhaustion, the kind that comes from a mind that can't stop reviewing, rather than from ongoing fresh injury every single night. I also want to name something about the posture in this card. Hands pressed over the face, rather than reaching for anything or anyone. That gesture is instinctive, the same motion almost everyone makes when something feels like too much to look at directly. It's not weakness. It's the most human response there is to genuine pain, and the fact that you made that motion alone, in private, doesn't mean you failed to cope. It means you were a person encountering something genuinely difficult, exactly the way any person would. Let me turn the next card, because I want to know how you actually managed to keep functioning through all of this. And this is where the reading turns towards something you need to hear. This is a figure in white, a lion beside her, both hands resting gently, almost tenderly, on its open jaw. No struggle anywhere in the image, just calm, steady contact with something that could, in theory, be overwhelming. This is how you did it. Not through force, not through simply refusing to feel anything, but through a specific, quiet kind of strength that most people never develop because most people never have to. I want to describe what this actually looked like in practice because it's been so consistent for you that you've stopped recognizing it as a skill at all. You learn to hold something genuinely difficult with a steady hand, day after day, without letting it destroy your ability to function, without letting it show in ways that would have burdened the people around you with worry they weren't equipped to carry. I want to be honest about the cost of that skill because I don't want to only celebrate it without acknowledging what it took from you. Managing pain this well, this consistently, requires an enormous, ongoing expenditure of energy that nobody around you ever saw, because the entire point of the skill was that it didn't show. You've been doing something genuinely difficult every single day and receiving essentially no credit for it, because the credit that would normally come from visible struggle never arrived. You made it look easy. It was never easy. I want to describe the flowers woven around this figure in the image because they soften the whole meaning in a way worth naming. There's no armor here, no weapon, just gentleness, applied consistently to something that could easily have overwhelmed a person without it. That's an accurate description of how you actually managed everything you were carrying, not through hardness, not through shutting down or going numb, but through a kind of continuous, deliberate tenderness toward your own experience, even while that experience was genuinely painful. I also want to point out that the lion in this image isn't fighting back. It's simply present, being met, being held rather than battled. That's the actual skill you developed, whether or not you've ever named it this clearly before. Not suppression, not denial, a steady, ongoing willingness to stay present with something difficult without letting it consume you entirely. That's rare. Most people, faced with what you've faced, either shut down completely or let it show in ways that disrupted everything around them. You did neither. You held it gently for longer than anyone should have had to. Let me pull a clarifier, because I want to know whether anyone has actually seen this clearly, the way I'm seeing it right now. There it is. And I'm relieved to see this one, because it answers the question honestly. This is a woman seated on a throne at the water's edge, an ornate covered cup held in both hands, deeply feeling, deeply perceptive, watching with real attention rather than a passing glance. Someone has seen this, not the full extent of it, and not with complete understanding of everything you've carried, but someone in your life has noticed more than you've given them credit for noticing. I want to describe what I mean by this, because it's a specific, important distinction. There is at least one person who has looked at you at some point and sensed that something heavier than you were letting on was sitting underneath your steadiness. They may not have said anything, unsure how to bring it up, worried about overstepping, uncertain whether you wanted it acknowledged. I want to name why they've stayed quiet, because it matters, and it isn't a failure on their part either. Approaching someone about a pain they've clearly been working hard to hide is genuinely difficult, even for people who care a great deal. There's a real fear of getting it wrong, of naming something the person isn't ready to have named, of making things worse by drawing attention to a wound they've been carefully protecting. That hesitation isn't indifference. It's often exactly the opposite, a kind of care so cautious it's talked itself out of acting. I want you to consider, honestly, who that person might be. Not someone who's asked you directly whether you're okay in the flat, routine way people ask without really wanting the real answer. Someone whose attention has lingered on you a beat too long at some point, who's watched you a little more carefully than usual during a stretch you thought you were hiding. Well, that person exists. And this card is telling me they're closer to actually saying something than you'd currently guess. I want to describe the covered cup this figure holds with both hands, because it's an unusual detail worth taking seriously. Most cups in this deck are shown open, visible, their contents plain to see. Hers is closed, private, held carefully rather than displayed. That's a picture of someone who notices deeply but doesn't necessarily broadcast what they've noticed. They may have been sitting with their own concern about you quietly, the same way you've been sitting with your own pain quietly. Both of you circling the same unspoken thing without either one finding the words to bring it into the open yet. I also want to point out that she's seated at the very edge of the water, close enough to be touched by it, rather than standing safely back from it. That proximity tells me this person isn't observing you from a comfortable distance. They've let themselves get close enough to actually be affected by what they've sensed in you, which is precisely the kind of person who eventually does find the courage to say something, once they sense the moment might finally be right. Let me turn the next card, because I want to know what actually starts to move you out of this there. And this is exactly the shift I wanted to see here. This is a figure sitting in a small boat, a covered form beside them, 6 swords standing upright in the boat itself, moving steadily across still water toward a distant shore. This is movement, finally, out of where you've been and toward somewhere calmer. I want to describe this transition carefully because it isn't dramatic, and I don't want you expecting something sudden and cinematic when the actual shape of it is quieter than that. This is a slow, steady crossing, not a single dramatic rescue. But it is genuinely moving in a clear direction, away from the turbulence you've been sitting in, and toward water that's calmer the further you travel. I want to point out that there are 2 figures in this boat, not one. Someone is with you for at least part of this crossing, whether that's the person from the previous card finally speaking up, or someone else entirely who steps forward once they sense you might finally be ready to let a little of the weight be witnessed. You are not making this particular crossing entirely alone, even though so much of what led up to it you had to face by yourself. I want to describe the covered form seated beside the traveler in this image, because it carries meaning worth naming clearly. It represents the old weight, folded up and set to one side rather than being carried openly across the water. That's not avoidance. It's what actually happens when something painful has finally genuinely started to move. It doesn't disappear, but it stops needing to be held out in front of you at all times. It can rest wrapped beside you while you focus on the actual crossing rather than the full weight of everything that led up to it. I also want to point out that the water this boat is moving through is calm, even though the 6 swords standing upright in the boat suggest real difficulty being carried. That calm water is the important detail. Wherever you're heading, the crossing itself doesn't have to be turbulent, even though what you're carrying through it was. You're allowed for this particular part of the journey to actually be gentle, rather than one more difficult thing added on top of everything else. Let me turn the next card, because I want to know what's actually waiting for you once you finish this crossing. There it is, and this is exactly the right note to move toward as this reading nears its end. This is a figure kneeling at the edge of still water beneath an open night sky filled with stars, pouring water calmly from 2 jugs, completely unguarded, nothing rushed or anxious in the posture at all. This is hope, and I want to be careful describing it, because I don't want to promise you something falsely bright after everything this reading has already acknowledged. This isn't a card about everything suddenly becoming easy or the past somehow being erased. It's about something quieter and more honest than that, a genuine, steady sense that the worst is actually behind you and that you're allowed, finally, to stop bracing quite so hard against what might come next. I want to describe why this specific quality of hope matters so much for someone who's carried what you've carried. It isn't naive. It's hope that exists on the other side of real difficulty, which makes it considerably sturdier than the kind of hope that's never been tested. You've earned the right to this particular hard-won version of it, and it's already beginning to settle in you, even if it still feels fragile right now. I want to describe the two jugs in this image because they're worth naming specifically. One pours onto solid ground, the other into a still pool of water, both being tended at once, neither one neglected in favor of the other. That balance matters here. This card isn't asking you to abandon caution entirely and become recklessly trusting overnight, and it isn't asking you to stay permanently guarded either. It's showing you a person capable of nourishing, both trusting enough to let hope back in, while still honoring the very real wisdom your own caution has earned through everything you've survived. I also want to point out the 7 smaller stars surrounding the single large one in this card, because that configuration suggests something worth watching for in the weeks ahead. This isn't a single, isolated moment of relief that has to carry the entire weight of proving your hope was justified. There are smaller confirmations built into what comes next, one after another, each one gently reinforcing that the worst really is behind you. Watch for those. They're going to arrive quietly, and they matter. Let me turn the last card, because I want to know what this all becomes once you're finally not carrying it alone anymore. There it is. And this is exactly where I want to leave you. This is a modest house in the distance beneath a rainbow. 2 figures with arms raised underneath it. Small children dancing at their feet. A calm river running past in the foreground. This is what's actually waiting for you, once enough of this has been witnessed and shared that you're no longer holding the entire weight by yourself. Not a dramatic transformation into a completely different life, but something quieter and more durable, genuine warmth, genuine connection. People around you who know at least part of what you've actually carried and love you fully anyway, rather than only loving the carefully managed version you've been showing everyone. I want to point out the rainbow specifically, because it only ever appears after rain has already fallen. That detail matters here more than in almost any other reading I could give you. This isn't a promise of good weather still to come, still uncertain, still hoped for. It's confirmation that the difficult stretch has genuinely happened and that something lighter is already quietly becoming visible on the other side of it. I want to describe the children dancing at the feet of the 2 adult figures in this card because they speak to something continuing rather than a single, isolated moment of relief. Whatever peace you eventually reach doesn't stay frozen at one bright afternoon that fades back into difficulty by the following week. It grows, extends, becomes the actual texture of an ongoing life, the way a river keeps flowing calmly past the scene rather than existing only in the single moment a picture happens to capture it. I also want to point out the modest scale of the house itself, because it matters here specifically. This isn't a card about a dramatic, transformed existence, unrecognizable from the one you're currently living. It's about the same ordinary life you already have, simply carrying considerably more warmth in it than it currently does. The same people, the same rooms, the same days, but finally shared rather than endured. Finally witnessed rather than managed entirely on your own. Let me pull it together. Here's your reading. You carried something genuinely heavy, accumulated over time rather than arriving as a single event, and you carried most of it alone, specifically in the private hours when there was nobody left to perform wellness for. That isolation made an already difficult thing considerably harder, because being unwitnessed in your struggle stripped away the confirmation that it actually mattered as much as it did. You managed it with a quiet, extraordinary strength that nobody properly credited, because the entire point of that strength was that it didn't show. It cost you real, ongoing energy that nobody around you ever saw. And at least one person in your life has already sensed more than they've said out loud. Someone whose attention has lingered on you longer than usual, closer to speaking up than you currently realize. You're already moving slowly and steadily toward calmer water, not alone this time. What's waiting on the other side is a sturdier, hard-won kind of hope, and eventually a life with real warmth in it, built with people who know at least part of what you've carried and choose you fully anyway. I want to say the whole shape of this once more, cleanly, before turning to the practical instructions, because it deserves to be held as one complete picture rather than a string of separate observations. You carried something genuinely heavy, mostly alone, and you did it so well that the doing of it became invisible, which meant the credit that should have come with it never arrived. That was never fair. It was never a reflection of anything lacking in you. It was simply what happens when strength is quiet enough to look effortless. That chapter has closed. What's ahead isn't a continuation of the same weight in a new form. It's the slow, honest work of finally letting some of it be witnessed and discovering to your own surprise that being witnessed doesn't diminish what you survived. It confirms it. Now, the practical part. First, let yourself actually name what you've carried, even just privately, in your own words, without minimizing it. There's a strong habit for people who've managed pain this quietly for this long, of downplaying it the moment they try to put it into words, almost automatically reaching for a smaller, more manageable description than the truth. Resist that habit, at least once, just for yourself. Write down or simply think clearly what it's actually been like at its full size without editing it down. Notice specifically the words you reach for automatically. If you catch yourself calling it not that big a deal or nothing really in your own private thoughts, pause and ask whether that's accurate or whether it's simply the same performance you've been running for everyone else, now running on yourself too. Second, consider letting the person from the fourth card in a little further. You don't have to tell them everything all at once, and you don't have to have a dramatic, planned conversation about it. Sometimes it's as simple as answering an ordinary "how are you" with something slightly more honest than your usual automatic response, and watching what happens when you do. Third, be gentle with yourself about how long this has taken to move through. There's no correct timeline for carrying something this heavy, and there's no failure in the fact that it's taken this long to even begin feeling like it's shifting. Comparing your pace to some imagined standard of how quickly you should have processed this only adds another burden on top of everything you're already carrying. Fourth, notice the moments when the old habit of performing wellness kicks in automatically, and consider, just occasionally, letting it not fire. You don't need to become a different, more openly emotional person overnight. Simply notice the reflex, and every so often, let there be a small crack in it, on purpose, with someone you trust. That crack doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be as small as letting your face show what you're actually feeling for a moment before you correct it back into your usual expression in front of someone safe. That small, private moment of not managing yourself is worth more than it seems, because it's practice for the larger honesty this reading is gently pointing you toward. Fifth, let the credit you never received land now, even if it's coming late and from an unexpected source. What you did surviving this, managing it, still showing up for other people while carrying it was genuinely remarkable. Let that be true, even though almost nobody said so at the time. It doesn't need anyone else's validation to have been real, but it's allowed to feel good to finally hear it named. Sit with that acknowledgement for a moment right now, actually, rather than letting it pass by quickly the way you might be tempted to. You did something extraordinary. Let that land fully at least once before moving on to the next thing the way you usually do. And sixth, the one that matters most, trust that the crossing described in this reading is actually happening even on the days it doesn't feel like it. Healing from something carried this long and this quietly rarely moves in a straight line. There will be days that feel like a step backward, days the old heaviness returns in full force without warning. Those days don't mean the crossing has stopped. They're simply part of the water you're moving through on the way to somewhere calmer. I want to say a little more about those setback days because I don't want you caught off guard by them or to mistake them for failure. Grief and pain held quietly for a long time rarely leaves all at once, in a single clean departure. It tends to leave in waves, each one a little smaller than the last, with genuine stretches of relief in between that can make the returning waves feel like a betrayal of the progress you thought you'd made. They're not. They're simply how this kind of healing actually moves, and knowing that in advance may help you meet those days with less alarm when they arrive. Okay, small favor, and I want this one specifically. If any part of this landed for you, if you recognized even a piece of your own experience somewhere in what these cards were describing, come back and drop the words "I carried it" in the comments. Just that, I carried it. Not because I need you to explain what it was. You don't owe that to me or to anyone else watching. Just those 3 words, as an acknowledgement to yourself, written down somewhere outside your own head for the first time. I want to see how many of us have been carrying something alone, quietly, for longer than anyone around us has realized. The number is going to be larger than any of us expected. And there's something genuinely healing about seeing that acknowledged by hundreds of strangers who understand exactly what that particular kind of quiet endurance costs. There's a specific kind of comfort in that comment section that I don't think exists anywhere else in this format. Not celebration, not excitement about something arriving. Simply recognition, offered quietly by people who've never met each other, all confirming the same thing without needing to explain the details. Sometimes that's the exact kind of company a person needs most. If these keep reaching you at the right moment, subscribe, there's more coming, and I want you here for it. So here's where I'll leave you, and I want to say this last part slowly, because I mean every word of it. What you did was not small. Carrying real pain while still functioning, still showing up, still being the person other people leaned on that isn't weakness disguised as strength. It's actual strength, sustained for far longer than anyone should reasonably have had to sustain it, without the recognition that should have come with it. I want to describe one more thing before I close, because it deserves saying plainly. There's a specific kind of grief that belongs to people who managed pain. Well, grief for all the times someone could have asked, could have noticed, could have offered the small gesture that would have made an unbearable stretch slightly more bearable, and simply didn't, because you'd made it look like you didn't need it. That grief is real too, separate from the original pain itself, and it's allowed to exist alongside everything else this reading has named. I want to add one thing before I go, gently, because this reading has touched on genuine pain, and I don't want to leave that unacknowledged. If what's been sitting underneath everything you've carried has ever felt like more than you could safely hold on your own, please don't keep carrying that particular weight in silence the way you've carried everything else. Reaching out to someone, a person you trust, or a professional who's actually equipped to help isn't a failure of the strength this reading has been honoring. It's simply allowing something that heavy to finally be shared the way it always should have been. You were never actually alone in deserving to be seen this clearly. You just hadn't been. Yet. You are now. I'll see you at the next one.